So let's see. Should we go ahead? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, we're really excited, of course, to share our newest Click2Science PD website, Click2Engineering, with everyone. And Sandra's going to drop the website link in the chat so that people can access it. But it is very easy. It's just www.click2engineering.org. That's the number 2, as you can see on the slide. So we're going to start out just by introducing ourselves and sharing a little bit about sort of where we are thinking about engineering education and some how we sort of got started ourselves. So I will go ahead and start. So I'm Becky Swanson. And I'm a STEM specialist with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and the project lead for Click2Engineering. And so, when I think of engineering and sort of what inspires me and how I started out in engineering, I think back to the early years of my career, back when I was an educator at a small children's science center in California. And I was the director for over a decade of this camp there called Camp Kinetic, which was wildly popular, and it was really based on physical science as opposed to biology or one of the other science fields. And the most popular activities of that camp, over the years, I think I ran that camp for over a decade. The most popular activities of that camp were always the ones where the kids were doing things that had doing activities that had no one right end product, no specific build this exact thing kind of result. Things like designing marble ramps or reverse pinball machines, things like designing cars that could travel over oobleck, which is very fun, by the way. Things like wind-powered sailboats or bridges that could hold a lot of pennies, and if you think about these things, these are all, as it turned out, very engineering based, and I just didn't know it at the time. And the kids loved being presented with a challenge, a bucket of random materials, and then the chance to use glue guns, which they always loved, in order to design and build something that might be successful, that might succeed in this challenge. And we had a lot of failures too, and we were always loved to see those as well because they're really fun and we learn a lot from those. But I didn't know anything about engineering back then. I came from a science background. In hindsight, we were absolutely doing engineering, and we were providing, our campers with a chance to solve open-ended, sometimes real-world problems, sometimes somewhat contrived, and that's okay too. Really, exploring a ton of materials, just anything they could use in their designs while they were working with other kids, testing them, changing the things that weren't working. And although those are things that we talk about when we talk about the practices for an engineering mindset, but really it's, those kind of experiences with youth early on in my career are really what inspired me to continue doing this work with Click2Engineering and trying to make those experiences available and valuable for other kids. So that's my sort of starter story. Sorry, that was a little long. Let's see, who would like to go next?
I can go next. Hello, my name is Ann O'Connor, and my background was science education as well. And previously, with a grant that I worked on, I taught workshops to teachers on wearable technology. And the focus was teaching circuitry, which is obviously science, and then computer science for programming different elements on microcomputers so that they had to play music or sounds or light up LEDs. However, there was a lot of engineering involved for both the teachers and the students as they tried to figure out how to make their circuits they needed to run all their components in their programming work, but they really wanted it to look good and they wanted it to function properly. And so there was a lot of redesigning and rethinking of ideas as they struggled to produce the vision they had in their heads on a piece of fabric. And so sometimes what they initially started with was very different than what they ended with, because the circuits really interfered with how they were originally thinking about their designs. So that's my story about engineering.
I like the open-endedness of engineering, also something that Becky and Ann both talked about. I really didn't know what engineering was until I was an adolescent, and my mother was the secretary in one of the engineering departments at the university. And I really learned from that experience that there was so much of it that was about problem solving. And as I started teaching engineering, one of the things that I've really enjoyed is it's one of the times when students have an opportunity to be very open, that the answer is not known, especially in a science classroom. A lot of times for students up through high school, the answer to the questions that they're investigating is already known, and they're more finding through their investigation answers that other people have found, which is a valuable experience. But engineering gives them a chance to solve a problem, to discover something that isn't already known, to find a solution that maybe nobody's tried, or maybe somebody's tried it and it didn't work, but they don't know that. And I think that's what I really enjoy when we do engineering, is that there's a lot of room for creativity and problem solving, because we don't necessarily know what the answer is going to be in the end. That's hard to teach. I think that's one of the things that as an educator we struggle with, and I did when I first started doing this too, because I don't know how long it's going to take to get to the end of this if the end product isn't known. I don't know when we finish necessarily, but I think that it is worth the struggle to get there, and that's one of the things that we've designed Click2Engineering to help people with that struggle, because this is something I really would have loved to have had more experiences with as a child, to have opportunities to explore in these ways. And when I first was introduced to engineering, it really encouraged me as a student to start thinking about problems that I'd never considered before, because I had tools now to think about solving something that the answer is not known. And so I think those are all things that we love about engineering. And we wanted to kind of give you a sense of what that is, so you can understand where this Click2Engineering project is coming from. And
I just want to reiterate, Sandra, that I would have loved to have done even half the stuff I've gotten to teach as an adult when I was a kid. So
I missed out, and I know I want to make sure that the students that we work with don't miss out. And we also wanted to start at the very beginning here to acknowledge that STEM Next has been a really important partner for us in this work. The STEM Next has really helped us make this come into existence. Their goal as an organization is to strengthen STEM learning by building knowledge, building systems, building capacity in the field. And their investments help educators, leaders, policymakers, and funders understand what can really be effective in building the field of STEM learning. And we have really benefited from their support, not just financially that they've helped fund this project, but also in their critical thinking about what is needed in the field and what we can do to advance that. Click2Engineering is designed to help address the need that out-of-school time programs have to support them with resources on teaching engineering and making them available so they can use them at any time when they're needed, and also to help programs offer high-quality, inclusive STEM learning experiences that are particularly focused on engaging girls in engineering. And that's really what we're trying to do with Click2Engineering. Click2Engineering is totally a story about collaborations, and we've been working with a lot of experts in the field and educators on the ground to understand what these needs are and what resources we can bring to bear to help programs. And today we're going to be talking with two of our important collaborators who have helped make this project possible.
So our first collaborator that we'll be hearing from is Meredith Portsmore, Dr. Meredith Portsmore, who's the director for the Center of Engineering, Education and Outreach, the CEEO. You'll hear her reference that, at Tufts University in Boston. So Meredith has been very involved with our Click2Engineering community of practice. And we recently had this chance to talk with her about her career working in engineering education. engineering education?
Oh, it's such a great question, Becky. It's hard to remember. It's been a while. Yeah, I mean, engineering education, I got started in, it's really personal, right? I came to Tufts to become an engineer, and I really struggled when I first got here. I wasn't really sure what engineering was. I just kind of picked it from high school. Some of the teaching approaches were really hard. It was the first time I experienced some bias for being a woman. You're not an EE, are you? Are you really going to do this? And so I was really trying to find my way. Was I going to be an engineer? Was I not going to be an engineer? And I fell into some of the first folks at Tufts who were doing engineering education. And that really sparked my passion of thinking about, right, how do we transform folks' experience with engineering education, right? Because it was this great blend of doing technical things and hands-on things, but also thinking about the social science piece of learning and doing and all those pieces. And it's kind of spiraled from there in terms of, now that I've become a parent, it also is just really deeply personal and passionate about wanting to transform both what folks experience in K-12 as well as undergraduate as a great way to change the world, right? This is engineering education, I feel like is my contribution to solving some of the world's problems by helping, develop students for those future roles, whether they're politicians or engineers that will actually, tackle those big problems.
And of course, now you're the director for the Center of Engineering Education and Outreach, but you were there for sort of when it started, weren't you?
Yeah, I started back when the center first started in the mid-90s doing engineering education. And we were just trying to convince folks that this was a thing to do. And, there were a lot of naysayers who were like, why don't you try and make tiny doctors or tiny lawyers? So people didn't quite grasp the fact that this was about problem solving, about using knowledge from mathematics and science and elsewhere in the world to bring to bear on new projects for kids. It was about pushing back on right answers and worksheets and showing like this broad range of solutions and letting kids know that that's what the work of being a grown-up looks like, no matter which fields you go into.
So you touched on this a little bit, but tell us more about what a meaningful engineering learning experience really looks like for youth.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely passionate about, the thinking about who gets to participate in engineering, but at the base level, I want to transform what K-12 education looks like. And engineering is a powerful way to do that, because we want students to not just be memorizing information or repeating procedures, but really learning practices that serve them in solving problems. So, right, it's getting that problem of, I need to feed the guinea pig over Christmas or holiday vacation, and figuring out, okay, what tools do I have that can do this? What do we have to worry about? How much water does a guinea pig need? And really having that chance to bring in their technical knowledge, as well as knowing things about animals and how to solve. So those messy problems, right? And there's more than one way to do it, whether you use a container, whether you build your own drip pipe system, right? Those really deep problems that students can sink their teeth into and actually make something that gives them feedback and supports them in iterating and refining their ideas.
Yeah, and one of the things that I know we've talked about a lot is how, and you touched on this, right? Like the engineering really, even though we refer to it as engineering and we're doing engineering activities with kids and engineering design, it's really so much more widely applicable than just engineering. It's really more almost life skills than just engineering ed, but it's just such, as you said, just such a great tool for moving kids forward in that area. So one of our challenges, of course, as engineering educators is how do we support and help out all those folks who are leading these engineering activities for kids? So that can be teachers, out of school time educators, after school time educators, museum educators, right? There's such a broad variety, but how do we support adults who maybe don't have a lot of engineering background in learning about engineering so that they can then in turn support the youth we work with?
Yeah. And educators are doing such amazing work in this space, right? They're the ones who have been leading the charge, right? This has been folks really seeing what it does for students and the benefit and working so hard to bring it into their classroom. And I kind of think about the adult learning in kind of two parts. One is, as an educator in the engineering space, you need a chance to engineer. So we need to give educators the chance to make and build and design and get to actually have that experience that they may not have had before. Both from the content side, right, to wrestle with the tools, to wrestle with the math and science ideas, but also from the fact of experiencing like what it's like to be frustrated, right? So they can have that empathy and connection with students in terms of like, yeah, you do need to iterate, but that doesn't mean it's not really hard and frustrating. You really do need to have like wild ideas and try things out and come back. It's not a perfect process. It's really, messy. So that's the first part, right? Like, how do we give adults a chance to engineer and play? And then the second part is, right, okay, now you're the educator and you're facilitating this work with students. How do you interact and respond? The analogy we use at Tufts a lot, right, is teachers are to learning as doctors are to medicine, right? Because doctors, right, we know really look at patients and, figure out what's going on. And we want that same thing to happen with teachers, right? We want them to be able to look at a pair of students, trying to build a chair for a teddy bear and getting really frustrated and, be able to come over there and, see, well, what are your ideas? What's happening here? Is it, so to be able to recognize both the disciplinary ideas and also, the interaction. I think you guys need some help, kind of scaffolding your thinking. I think you need some new ideas of how to use the materials to accomplish what you want to do. So it's kind of those two spaces so that we give, the way doctors have x-rays and blood tests and all these ways of digging into a patient's health, we want to give teachers those same set of tools in terms of being able to, notice what's happening with students, look at their designs, and think about what would be productive in that moment and lead, classroom conversations that help pull out, the ideas and learning that's happening.
So since you mentioned tools, and I know that this is some of the work that you do, especially with the Tufts Teacher Engineering Education Program. What are some of the tools that you use to help support new educators in learning about how to teach engineering?
Well, yeah, one of our favorite tools after, getting your hands dirty with hands-on craft materials, Lego robotics, Arduinos, all of the above is video, right? I mean, this is the closest thing we have in kind of the education space to a residency, right? That we can really look at video of kids talking and working together and say, oh, okay, what was happening here? What were they trying to do? What were their ideas? And to really take that time, because in the moment as an educator, myself included, you're so worried about what you need to do and what needs to happen, right? So video is really amazing for being able to slow down and be like, oh, that student had an amazing idea. I should be listening for those kinds of ideas. And like, oh, that idea, that's really hard to understand. But if I think about it a little more, right, that's the beginning of, they have some really powerful ideas about friction there, but maybe they're using words that I wouldn't expect in this moment, but now I'm ready for it, right? After I've watched those kind of video, I'm ready to recognize ideas in new forms and be able to see that, right? Oh, there's great beginnings here with kids, and that's where I want to build from. So video is definitely one of that, of looking at existing things that have happened, of having teachers record video of their classroom, of having teachers record interviews with students, really to give us that shared experience.
Right, and this, of course, is one of the reasons why we forefront video watching opportunities on the Click2Engineering website, is to give educators that experience when they maybe don't have it. Because as we know, right, practice is everything. So you have that opportunity to do that ahead of time. It's going to make you a better educator when you're in front of the kids. Those in the moment decisions are so challenging sometimes. So nice to have practice. So one of the kind of bigger questions, and the last question here we'll talk about today, is really like, how has teaching engineering changed over the last 5 or 10 years? And you could take this as, how have you thought about, or you or the CEO thought about how engineering has changed, how have you shifted and how we think about it and how it's perceived?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're definitely seeing changes and shifts, right? we started out, just trying to get folks to think about it and adopt it. And I think lots of things have happened, especially in the US, to change that conversation. The inclusion of engineering in next generation science standards, whether you're going after their specific standards or not, it really represents that everyone knows that, the next generation of students need to have engineering experiences and practices and knowledge, whether they go on to become engineers or, politicians or anyone in the community, right? It's great for them to have this information. So we're starting to see that, right? This recognition that it's not a special category for some folks. I think in the beginning, there was a lot of talk of, it was only for particular students or students who were really advanced in particular areas. But I think more and more we're starting to recognize the resources that all students bring, and that it can be a great way to capitalize on their lived experiences, their passions, and engineering can be a way to tap into all of those and get them not only excited to do engineering, but excited about learning in general, that, oh, this is about what I want to do. So yeah, that's one of the trends. I think the other one I would point to just is we live in an amazing era, right? The tools have really changed a lot, right? And whether you're using craft materials or robotics, there's so many more ways for students to make things that are functional that they can test and try out in the world, that solve problems from a chair for a teddy bear to sit on to robots that do all kinds of amazing tasks. It's a really interesting to see how many tools kids can have that are very similar to what professionals use, but put into new formats.
We didn't touch on or you kind of touched on this earlier, but I didn't pick up on it. One of the things that we offer on the Click2Science, I did a lot, Click2Engineering website is, and it's why we have one starting up soon, is this opportunity to participate in a community of practice where you get to learn about engineering and about engineering education with other people. And I just wanted to give you the chance to talk about that, because we do also have on the website the chance to do this by yourself asynchronously, but also if you have the chance to learn with people. I know that that's some of the work that you do, so I don't know if you want to touch on the difference between those two experiences.
Yeah, and
for adults specifically.
I think 2 decades ago, right, we didn't have a lot of great information that led to designing experiences for teachers. So those teachers especially were really slogging through it with them, right? And we know that the one-time PD or the 1-week PD isn't, there's so much to digest there, it doesn't really make sense. And we know how important the community is now, right? The teachers in discussion with other teachers is really powerful. So the community and practice on Click2Engineering is fantastic. It's, it represents best practices in teacher education, right? The sustained place where you can not only get information or activities for your learning spaces, but you can also build connections and relationships with other folks, right? And that information can go from all directions, right? It's not this, one-way direction from folks who do engineering, but right, teachers sharing, well, this is what works for materials in my space, and this is what works for, how students schedule or pullouts work. How do I, make sure everybody gets an opportunity? So it's really such an amazing collective knowledge experience, the community of practice that Click2Engineering is running. So it's really exciting to see that happening.
And then lastly, I just want to give you the opportunity to if there's any final words of wisdom based on your extensive expertise that you'd like to pass on to folks before we wrap up here.
I'm really excited to see the resources on Click2Engineering for the informal space. The informal space has been such an amazing space where students get to try things and take risks. And I think it's really powerful what folks are doing in that space. Because the other part we've really seen, right, is how, no matter what you learn, what ideas you learn, is how you feel about your experience.
Yeah.
And we really see these informal educators, kind of leading the way and making sure students see engineering, see themselves as engineers and see it as a possible future. that's really important. And that means giving them experiences where they feel successful and powerful and supported. And there's just so much potential in the informal ed space for that. And I think Click2Engineering is really supporting all that. So it's exciting to see all those pieces come together to make sure we're not only, telling kids what engineering is, but telling them, yes, you can do this in so many different ways.
And doing the same thing for the educators as well.
Absolutely.
So, all right. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us with us today. We really appreciate it. So Meredith touched on so many important aspects of engineering and her experiences in engineering and her longtime expertise in this. And of course, especially, the opportunity to do engineering and play is critical for both us as educators and professional development, but also for youth as they learn about engineering, is that both of those, it's important to have those experiences. And that's part of the reason why, that's largely the reason why we include learning activities on the Click2Engineering website. So there are resources there that adults can use for their own development, or that can also be used with kids. And of course, in that video, we also, in that interview, we also heard Meredith reference bear chairs, which, so this, I'm going to take this opportunity to give a little plug that we do have these community of practices starting up. We have one starting tomorrow, actually, July 14th through August 4th. In which you'll be starting with the bear chair. So if that sounds appealing to you, then get started. And even if you can't join us for that first session, please do feel free to register and join us for the remaining sessions. After that, Sandra has dropped the link to registration into our chat. We do also have another community of practice coming up in the fall. That's one will be 8 weeks long, and it'll run from September 21st through November 2nd. So if you are interested in having that more synchronous group-like feel as you learn engineering, please do come and join us. These are free. So we really do encourage you to sign up and register and come and hang out with us for a little while online. All right, moving on to our next collaborator.
All right, next is Christine Cunningham, and she is from Penn State University, and she's going to talk about her work in science education and how she came to focus on engineering and developing an engineering mindset. And her work in this area has been the foundation of the Click2Engineering website.
Thanks, it's great to be here today. My name is Christine Cunningham, and I work at Penn State University as a professor of practice in education and engineering. At Penn State, I am the founding director of Youth Engineering Solutions, which is a team that is designing curricular resources for engineering education pre-K through 8 for in-school and out-of-school settings.
Thank you. We're going to be talking today about how we can help youth develop an engineering mindset. And one of the things we're trying to promote on Click2Engineering is that youth learn about engineering, but using the same practices that professional engineers use as they do their work and develop an engineering mindset. And as we're talking about this, I wonder if you could maybe talk about how you got started in engineering education and your shift maybe from working with engineers to working with educators. How did that come about in your work?
Sure. So I, from earliest memory, was always planning to be a teacher. Fortunately, I was raised with parents, particularly my mother, who had a strong interest in science and mathematics. So whether I did science or mathematics was not an issue. Initially, my focus was on science in high school and college, and then I went to graduate school for science education. But I also began to get very interested in middle school about why students, particularly girls, were dropping out of science. And since I thought it was fascinating, I figured it must be something about the way that science is being taught. And so that piqued my interest to continue into graduate school and start to think about how we create learning environments that provide opportunities for all students in science. And eventually I was introduced to engineering as a graduate student. I had an advisor who both had a degree in education and in engineering. And we started to think about how we could weave engineering into some of the environmental science work we were doing at that time. And what I noticed when we started to do that is that there were a bunch of students who hadn't traditionally really flourished in classrooms that got extremely engaged by that engineering challenge. So my little antenna started to go off, and I started to think about engineering with younger students, and particularly in conjunction with science. So when I started this work, this was almost, I guess, 30 years ago now, 25 years ago now. Engineering had made its way in some small ways into high school and maybe upper middle school, but it had not got into the lower grades, elementary school and preschools. And so my work started to think about the fact that children are sort of naturally inclined to be problem solvers and to design solutions to problems they might have, whether they were forts or ski jumps or houses for their dolls. So this is a natural thing we have, but we hadn't really been fostering it in classroom environments, at least with the little guys. So I started to ask myself, okay, why aren't we doing this? And what would it look like if we did this in sort of an age appropriate way? I had to think a lot about what doing engineering with little kids meant, like what would students need to know about engineering, and how would we know high quality engineering if we went into a classroom and it was happening? Like, how would we know that this was high quality engineering versus not high quality engineering? And then, as I said, I was also really interested in how we could start this field with an equity oriented lens. So from the very beginning, how do we think about designing educational resources and tools that could support, the wide diversity of students and of ideas that we really need to draw into education?
And how did this lead you to thinking about an engineering mindset and helping to encourage that in children?
Yeah, good question. So I knew from the beginning and drawing from a lot of the work that I had done in science education that what we didn't want to do is focus on, here are some factoids and let's have the kids, do some worksheets about those and regurgitate them. So I knew that we wanted a very, active approach that got the students engaged in what engineers actually do. But at the time when I started, there was literally no research about what that was or what engineering looked like with young children. So first I went and read a lot of literature about how engineers do engineering. So there's a set of sort of social science research that follows engineers, and they write about the work that they do and try to get a sense of what are the critical parts of their work, the critical practices that they're engaged in that make their work engineering and not something else. I took a couple engineering classes, and then I spoke with a lot of engineers about their work because my background was not as an engineer, which in some ways was, I think, not a terrible thing because it made me go out and really ask all those questions of the people who were engineers or who practiced engineers and tried to figure out what happens what makes engineering engineering. How do engineers describe what they do? What do they think are important for students to know? And then we had to take that and think about not only what engineers think is important, but how do we make sense of this for K-12 engineering education? And as I said, there was no literature when we started. So we had to do some of our own literature and also had to think a little bit, or our own research, I should say. And then we had to think about what or how do we educate both engineers as well as the general population? So what does the general population need to know about the role that engineering plays in our society? What are some of the ways that engineering has really advanced the world that we live in, and what are some of the ways that engineering might have caused some issues as well. It's not just always a happy story. And so it's trying to distill some of those practices, first sort of theoretically, but I'm a very practical and classroom oriented kind of person. So once we had an early set, we tried to pull those into curriculum resources that we were developing. And then we really went into classrooms and worked very closely with teachers to test and refine a set of engineering practices that would be the basis for our engineering mindset, to figure out what is possible, what's really possible in real world settings, in classrooms and in out of school settings, given all the constraints and opportunities that they have. Then we had to think about also what is a developmental trajectory of the various kinds of practices. So what children are capable of thinking about when they're, say, 5 years old, if you're asking them about, let's say, criteria and constraints, which are one of the things we know defines engineering, is thinking about a problem and its criteria and constraints. What they can do at 5 years old is very different than what they can do at 8 years old, and is very different than what they can do in middle school. So how do we think across those, that sort of developmental trajectory as to what those engineering practices might look like that can lead to that kind of mindset. And then we had to think about what are the scaffolds for the educators, many of whom were also new to education engineering. So how do we create resources that make them feel confident in what they're teaching, and that encourage them to engage, help the kids engage in those practices, which can be very open-ended and can be sort of uncomfortable if you're not used to that. Fortunately, since we started, we have distilled a set of engineering practices, but there's been a lot of new research. There's a flourishing set of people who do research on K-12 engineering education. And so now we go back and read those, that research, try to figure out, what and how we can shape the work that we're doing. So for instance, one of the things that my team and I have been thinking about a lot at Youth Engineering Solutions is how to teach children about engineering and social justice. We call it socially engaged engineering. And so we want kids to think, for instance, as they're starting to define a problem, about what are the different perspectives that people might bring to that challenge or that problem, who is more impacted and for the positive, and who's disproportionately impacted more negatively, and how to sort of consider those impacts of what you might be creating throughout that design process. And so how can we as resource developers help educators to bring that in and bring their students through that in a way that, again, makes sense for where they are in their developmental cycle, and also can be done in, whatever it is, 45 minutes or sometimes 32 minutes, because that's also a huge consideration. And so sort of identifying the practices that help kids have that general approach to engineering, and then scaffolding both the children and the educators through that process is something that we've been working on, for, I'd say, over 2 decades now.
How would you like to transform what youth are learning about engineering? What would you like to see different than what is happening in a lot of particularly after school programs today?
So I think one of the things that we would like to have kids do is to focus on engineering, as something that humans naturally do. So there can be some trepidation by educators if they're hearing you have to do engineering with your kids, and most of them are not engineers, and that's sounds like it's big and scary, but sort of recasting engineering as something that is all around them and that humans naturally engage in is one way that I think we can open up the field a little bit and get folks making the connections back to their communities or their families and the kind of work that they do to solve problems. I think helping educators, and to a lesser extent, because sometimes this isn't as overtly done, getting the kids to engage in those practices and really focus on the practices. So we don't know, for instance, what problems kids will face in the future. We have some ideas, but we don't know exactly what these students who will be, graduating from school in 15 or 20 years will face either if they go into engineering or if they're just voting citizens, what does the world look like? So we're really committed to helping the kids think about how they can have a systematic approach to solving problems, and how do they ask the kinds of questions that will help guide them through those learning experiences. We're also interested in making sure that what they do is engineering. And so engineering has, as a discipline right now, has certain practices and certain norms that make it engineering and not just tinkering or making, which those aren't bad, but they're different than engineering. And so, for instance, having the students or the youth think about what are the criteria for a successful design, how can those be measured and evaluated in ways that might satisfy either a client's need or a user's need? How do engineering and mathematics inform those designs? Because in engineering, those are very interwoven, and having some sort of more predictable results is something that we all want in a product, to know that it's going to work well. So really helping the kids to think about those, dive into problems they may not have seen before, connect those to their lives, but then also proceed through that problem solving process in some sort of way that is laying the groundwork for a systematicity, you know what I mean, for future problems, because that's really one of the things that needs to happen, I think, across problem solving, is to think about, like, what data do we have, what evidence do we have, what have we collected, what have we overlooked, and that kind of careful thought about what you're doing is really some of the bedrock of engineering. And all those practices will then serve kids well, no matter what they end up doing, whether it's going and pursuing an engineering career or thinking about a new proposed engineering project in their local community. We want them to think about not only that, you know, how the technology functions, but what are some of the responsibilities of engineering? How does the economic or the political or the social concerns, how are they brought in, what matters, and how can we make sure that we're creating technologies or sending projects forward that really balance those more than they might have been in the past.
I really like how that approach focuses on preparing young people for their future, and is appropriate for all the youth in our after school program, whether they decide to pursue a career in science or engineering or in another area. Because I think that's really important to a lot of us who work in after school, that we're really equipping young people for their future, even though we don't know exactly what that future is going to be.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This is a visual for the practices for developing an engineering mindset that Christine was talking about. And it captures some of those things that she was just speaking about toward the end, about what makes it engineering, what is unique to really being engineering. And this is also the framework that we use for the Click2Engineering website. And so you'll see these same practices are reflected in the structure of the website when you go there. And to make the practices more clear and what each of them are, we have a video blog from May that kind of unpacks each of these 10 practices. So I encourage you to listen to that video to get a little bit more familiar if you're interested in what these practices are and how they underlie what we have on the Click2Engineering website. We use this framework to kind of organize the videos, the training resources, even the engineering activities, the support, the work that is happening in out of school time programs, and developing those quality learning experiences that are going to prepare young people for their future. We want to provide you with the resources that you can use to engage youth in learning about engineering, or that you can use as you're training others who are working in this field. We see both
the people who are doing the work directly with youth, and those who are training and supporting educators to be important audiences for Click2Engineering. And one of the components on the Click2Engineering website that we're currently in the midst of developing are learning blasts, which are short, focused resources that you can use to learn on your own or to train your team. And we will have a practice or a learning blast for each of the practices and other strategies that you're going to use when you're teaching about engineering. Right now, we have about 5 of those available. And a learning blast will let you see some video so you can see the practice in action. It also connects you with the research in the field and offers some reflection and some expertise from practice, the people who are working in the field, to understand what we're talking about in terms of engineering education and out of school time. And as I said, we have 5 learning blasts that are currently available, and we'll be doing some filming of new video later this month to help us develop the next set of learning blasts that we will be using.
We want to leave you today, not just with some ideas about what you'll find on the website, but also how you can use it in your work. So would you please share any ideas that you have in the chat about using the site in your work, or how you can use it in your work? And while you're doing that, our Click2Engineering team will share some examples of how we are using the resources in our work.
So for example, in one of the projects that I lead here at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, I work with undergraduates to help them learn how to lead engineering activities with elementary aged youth in out of school time settings, after school classes, camps, library programs, etc. And so when I am working with those undergraduates, I use the videos that Sandra mentioned in the learning blasts, as well as some of the questions that we have there as a training activity, so to speak, during, and in order to give them, my undergraduates, that opportunity to really see engineering practices and learning in action, and to reflect on what they see in those moments. Particularly, we're doing it together as a group, much like community, as I spoke about earlier. So we watch the videos. Sometimes we watch them as a group, sometimes we watch them independently, but then we come back together to answer these prompt reflection questions and discuss. And these young adults I work with, many of whom are new to teaching, or new to engineering, or some of them are new to teaching and engineering. Really find this experience helpful in contextualizing how to use teaching tools, how to recognize the practices when in action with the kids, and to really think about what an engineering activity could or should look like. We also do in those training things, we also do engineering projects and share our designs with each other, so we can have those learning moments that Meredith spoke about, where as adult learners, we're learning how to do the engineering, how to teach engineering by doing engineering also, right? So we get to share the challenges and successes of each of those designs. And we have many, many challenges and many, many successes and many failures. And we use those as all as learning moments together. So those are some of the ways that I use the Click2Engineering website in my work as a teacher educator, as a teacher educator. Sandra, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about some of your experiences or your thoughts.
Yeah, a lot of the work I'm doing is for after school programs and developing training experiences for them. When I'm doing this, it's really important to me to center it around hands-on engineering activities, that, as you mentioned, Becky, learning engineering by doing engineering is really crucial. And I want to include hands-on experiences in a workshop, whether we're meeting in person or it's being delivered virtual. We do actual building, prototyping in those workshops, because there's a real cool interaction that happens between the engineering activity and what practices it kind of enables or lends itself for, and the practices that we're focusing on in the training. So I really try to make sure there's a great synchronicity between what we're doing for the hands-on and the practices that we're engaging in as we do the hands-on activity and what we're trying to learn and focus on in the workshop. I love how those come together, and I really encourage educators that you're not trying to include all the practices in every learning experience you have, but through the course of a whole series of experiences, so developing these practices, but you're going to be using maybe 2 or 3 at a time. Maybe you'll be doing a little bit more of that, but really trying to get that connection between what you're doing hands-on and those practices that you're doing. The learning blast, I really like to use as a pre-workshop activity. So I'll share the link to the learning blast with everybody before we come together for our in-person time or our synchronous time, whether it's in person or via the internet, so that we have some shared experiences and some vocabulary that we all have in common as we come together to talk about these practices. So for me, it's really the blend of hands-on engineering activities, videos, and learning blasts to dig a little deeper into those practices. And I love how those pieces come together, and they're all easy to pick up and use off of the Click2Engineering website.
And during the wearable technology workshops that I conducted, one of the things that I learned in working with K-12 teachers is that they love to collaborate, and they really learned well when they struggled together with their projects. And so I think the communities of practices are a good way to bring people together. And we have had teachers that have joined those communities of practice, bring people together to have a safe place where they can test and struggle together and learn together. The other thing that I found teachers really wanted were resources that would help them find the answers to their questions, like how to program the Batman theme song when you can't read music, or how to make a mobile that played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star while the LEDs in the fabric star lit up. And they could figure out these answers to the questions by using the practices for an engineering mindset. And so there are the learning blasts that they could go use to learn about those practices and then apply them to their projects. And so one of the things that they had to do was persist and learn through failure. And they also had to envision different solutions to their problems when the first solution didn't work. And the most successful workshop participants I had were those who had the perseverance to continue and not give up. And so in the end, there was a Batman insignia that flashed LEDs while playing the Batman theme song, because I can read music. So I translated it for him, all the music into letters, so he could program his device. And then the other participant ended with a beautiful mobile that played Twinkle Twinkle Little Star with 3 stars and a moon that lit up, because she went home over the lunch break and brought her sewing machine in so she could finish it fast enough to get it done. And so she just sewed it and got everything done in time and had it working by the end of the session. So those are just some examples of how creative people can get when they're just given that freedom to explore and figure out how they're going to work through that. But they're still using those practices of an engineering mindset without even realizing it at the time.
Thank you so much to my colleagues for sharing their stories. I do have one more way that we're gonna be using it coming up soon, and I'll mention that in a minute. But I also wanted to highlight Courtney's comment here that they'll be using the 10 practices for an engineering mindset. It's something that they're going to be incorporating in the planning and professional development layout for the 21st CCLC after school programs, which is awesome. So Courtney, I really hope that you find those useful, and please obviously give us feedback if you on anything that is useful, that you find that you need more. So one, awesome. I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat. Yes, I'm so glad you're excited. We are excited too. So I actually get to use the some more of our website work here in the coming month. As Sandra mentioned, I'll be working with and filming museum educators actually, who will be designing and leading engineering activities in summer camps, after school programs, and in pre-K through grade 5 outreach programs in schools. And in this case, it's a little different, right? These are folks who are experienced STEM educators but who could benefit from the opportunity to reflect on their current teaching practices and to really explore the nuances of teaching that is specific to engineering activities. And so I will be using the website to really introduce them to the different practices around engineering specifically, and then having, as they learn about those, having them sort of like do some reflections back, both in their own classroom spaces where they're learning, but also watching, again, the videos together, and also maybe trying out some of our learning activities on the website and seeing how those integrate into their slightly different teaching environment. So exciting that we get to use these resources across multiple contexts and out of school time spaces. So I will hand it over to Sandra to wrap us up here today. And just personally, thank you for joining us.
Over the next year, we're going to be designing learning blasts for all 10 of the practices for engineering mindset. We'll have webinars regularly, and also the interactive synchronous community of practice sessions. So there's lots of opportunities to join us in this journey as we continue figuring out just what Click2Engineering needs to be. And there is an opportunity, if you go to the website, to sign up for a monthly newsletter from Click2Engineering. You can also share ideas about blogs, or if you have something you'd like to share in a blog, or you'd like to have us learn more about and share with you, we invite you to do that. We also invite you just to email us directly at click2engineering@unl.edu to share your ideas. We really want to hear from users about what they're using on the website, what they need to have developed to make the website more useful for them, and be a partner with you as you are working to bring more really great engineering experiences to young people. So thank you so much for joining us and being part of the webinar today.